Are you passionate about foreign policy, national security, and the latest in domestic politics? Consider becoming a member of the DSR Network, your go-to source for in-depth analysis and insightful discussions. With the DSR Network podcasts, stay ahead of the curve on global affairs. Each episode features top experts, policymakers, and thought leaders who break down complex issues into digestible, engaging conversations. From breaking news to historical context, we cover the topics that matter most. Whether it's the intricacies of international diplomacy, the latest in national security strategies, or the dynamics of U.S. politics, the DSR Network has you covered. Members receive an ad-free listening experience, bonus content for virtually all of our shows, an invitation to join the DSR Slack community, enhanced show notes for select podcasts, and much more. Visit thedsrnetwork.com/buy and enter code GRADUATE to receive 30% off the regular membership price for the first year or first month. That's thedsrnetwork.com/buy and code GRADUATE. Thank you very much for your support.
This is the Daily Blast from the New Republic, produced and presented by the DSR Network. I'm your host, Greg Sargent. This week brought an extraordinary outpouring of rage at CNN from MAGA media figures and personalities. What got them so angry? Well, a CNN anchor wouldn't allow Donald Trump's campaign spokesperson to relentlessly smear debate moderators as biased against Trump, and CNN's fact-checker announced that the debate would be fact-checked. Those two things drove MAGA into a fury. In an intriguing way, this actually provides a glimpse into why we should be so worried about Project 2025's implementation in a second Trump presidency. This point was driven home to me by David Roberts, a smart critic of our discourse. He posted a must-read Twitter thread that connected the nonstop MAGA lying with what could happen to the government if Trump wins. In essence, the government itself would be corrupted into a tool for manufacturing propaganda across the board. With both CNN and Project 2025 very much in the news right now, we invited David back on to talk about the deeply ominous possibilities all this raises. Good to see you again, David.
Hey, Greg.
First, I should say, listeners, we recorded this before the debate, and you are listening to this after the debate. So by now, there may be even more anger at CNN. But either way, in the lead up to the debate, the MAGA fury was explosive. Just going to run through this quickly. CNN's Casey Hunt cut off Trump spokesperson Caroline Leavitt after she attacked moderators Dana Bash and Jake Tapper. Marjorie Taylor Greene spun up a wild theory about this, calling Bash's husband a member of the deep state and Tapper a Trump hater. Steve Bannon raged that CNN should apologize. And then came the eruption at CNN fact-checker Daniel Dale, with people like Stephen Miller preemptively smearing him as an anti-Trump liar based on the simple fact that he intends to fact-check both candidates. David, it's almost as if one of the core goals of MAGA propagandists is to bully the media into not telling the truth about Trump.
You know, it's funny. Remember when Stephen Colbert had his show and he was playing a right-wing character, and he used to say, reality has a left-wing bias as parody, as parody of the right. And now it's just like, yeah, like that's basically what they're saying. Just like, if correcting our facts is biased. I mean, they're coming closer and closer to just saying that right out loud. Like, you're allowed to have your truth and your facts, and we're allowed to have our truths and our facts, and choosing between them is biased on one side or the other. That's really what they think. That's what they feel in their gut,
It's central to the way they do politics, and I want to get into that in a sec. But first, let's talk about this really depressing Twitter thread of yours about MAGA. Yeah, you're good at those. About MAGA lies and Project 2025, which for listeners is a comprehensive blueprint for a second Trump term drawn up by his allies. A key pillar of this agenda is to purge the bureaucracy, the civil service, the so-called deep state, and stock it with corrupt loyalists to Trump. Now, here's what you got at. The government produces a lot of information. This is for the purpose of informing the act of governing and also for the purpose of informing Americans about the world. As you point out, though, if the bureaucracy is emptied out of independent professional experts and filled with people whose highest loyalty is to Trump and only Trump, all of a sudden a lot of government information could get very corrupted.
Yeah, I mean, this is what made me think about it is, this online argument over crime. So, crime's just sharply down under Biden, and right wingers hate that. They hate they hate it, so they just deny it. So they just say, no, it isn't. So that I was reading this argument, and the argument that crime is down is premised on official statistics, right? I mean, but mostly from the FBI. But it just got me thinking, like, well, what's going to happen to this argument if the FBI is run from top to bottom by people chosen specifically for their ideological loyalty to Trump? They're going to obviously, I mean, I don't even think they would deny this. They're obviously going to produce statistics, information that is helpful to Trump. That's what they view their role in government as doing, is Trump's greater glory. So I just want people to think about what's going to happen. Like, the left is constantly saying, like, the left has the reality has a left-wing bias and all this, fact checking. And I know lots of people on the left sort of despair that, like, having good information isn't more, like, powerful or dispositive in political arguments. Like, they wish it went farther. They wish it carried more weight. But I just want people to think about, like, what do you think the argument, what do you think discourse is going to look like when we genuinely don't know what the levels of crime are, right? We genuinely don't know because the statistical bodies and the reporters of those numbers are Trump loyalists. And I just think, broaden that point out. Never mind crime. Let's like job statistics, job growth statistics, all the economic statistics. You're not going to be able to trust any of them. And so to a large extent, there just isn't going to be anything like a fact of the matter on these questions. And all the left's army of fact checkers, what are they going to do with their time? They all depend on a federal bureaucracy that below the top level is mostly staffed by professionals who are stable in the bureaucracy from term to term, which is why even under Trump's first term, even under George W. Bush, basically, like, you could more or less trust the numbers coming out of OMB, and agencies like that, because they were still staffed by people who cared about expertise and cared about objective information. And very specifically, Project 2025 is going after that layer of people. It is that layer of people that they viewed as their main impediment last time. A bunch of people with their, sort of facts and legal, laws getting in their way of the things they wanted to do. And that's why they're replacing that layer of people. But I just think, like, as much as people despair now about misinformation and the sort of corruption of discourse, and everybody gets to choose their own realities and everybody's in their own bubble, I just think we have not seen anything yet.
I want to try to get at this idea that I think is underlying all this, which is this effort to eradicate the very possibility of something resembling objective truth, right? What we saw with this explosion of anger at CNN was anger at the very idea of treating Trump neutrally and not giving him special treatment, right? His spokesperson was supposed to be allowed to just smear whoever she wants on CNN, no matter how ridiculous, and CNN should just air it. MAGA rages at the idea of fact checks being applied to both candidates because they know Trump is the serial liar and Biden isn't. I mean, isn't this the real link to Project 2025? As you say, we want civil service professionals to strive for something like objective neutrality in dealing with information. Corruption does seep in for both parties at times, but I think, right, but with MAGA, we're seeing a rejection that's kind of wholesale.
Yeah, the corruption is the point. I mean, it's not even that's what they say they're going to do. It's not even like I've uncovered something here. Like, it's just what they say they're going to do.
Right. The rejection of the idea of fairness and neutrality is absolutely central to their way of doing politics.
Well, it's central. I mean, it's very sort of legendarily central to authoritarianism, right? I mean, you look at you look at Russia, you look at Turkey, like what happens when these guys get in, the very first thing they do is go after independent sources of information. Because what you want, if you're a strongman, you want for no one to be able to trust anything, right? You can't, you have no tether to reality. You have no solid facts. So you either your only choice is, who do you trust? And so in that case, you're going to trust the biggest guy with the biggest gang who's going to protect you, right? I mean, that's what they want to reduce the public's choice to, is like, whose tribe are you with? And the very idea that there's objective information outside of that, outside that applies to both sides, is anathema to that whole notion. Like, as in all cases, the left's interests are served by neutral third-party rules and information that apply to everyone equally. That is the circumstance under which something like left politics can thrive. And so any authoritarian trying to eradicate left politics goes after information first.
Well, I want to point out that we've already had a glimpse of what this can look like, but it's just a partial one, a small one. And it was during the first Trump presidency. I'm going to give you a few examples. I just went and looked back, okay? Trump ordered a top government official to search for evidence that his inaugural crowd was larger than it was. Okay, that happened.
I forgot about that.
Right. His White House set up a commission to, quote unquote, find evidence of voter fraud. Trump's Department of Homeland Security dishonestly twisted numbers to hype the threat of terrorists crossing the border. And this is a big one that people forget. Stephen Miller, who was then a top advisor to President Trump and would be in a second term as well, intervened to suppress a government finding that refugees carry economic benefits to the country. You remember that, David? That last one right there, I think that's a model for what we would see much more of in a second Trump term.
But like, even those are just sort of like marginal around the edges.
Right.
Like, this is what I'm trying to convey is like, this is my big worry about this election in general, is just like, there are a lot of structural things in place in the U.S. that took a long time and a lot of work to get in place that have become almost invisible to people, but just because they're so familiar and so ubiquitous. But like, all the objective government sources of information being corrupted at once is a way bigger deal than people appreciate, I think. Like, you really are losing touch with, in a very material way, you're losing any objective tie to reality. And we need reality. So it's not just going to be lying about this or that statistic. It's going to be a sort of wholesale state of just not knowing, just literally not knowing what's happening. Is the economy going up or down, or jobs being created or destroyed? You know what? Like, you're just not going to know. And like I say, like, the left needs good information. That is the engine of left politics.
Well, I want to underscore what you said there. There was a kind of bumbling aspect to some of these things that were done in a first Trump term. The voter fraud commission crashed and burned. The stuff about crowd sizes made Trump look silly and so forth. But the key is, with Project 2025, is that the planning really shows they're going to take a much more careful, deliberate, sophisticated, and, as you say, comprehensive approach to using the government.
They learned. I mean, they learned. They like, this is the key thing. The key bit of context around Project 2025 is precisely that they saw Trump's first term as a failure. And the reason he failed in their eyes is not that he set the federal bureaucracy off on a bunch of insane, ludicrous tasks to prove falsehoods. The problem in their mind is that the people assigned to do that didn't follow through, right? That's the deep state. It's the people down there who couldn't be manipulated to make up information that got in their way. And they learned about that. So among other things, they're just in the midst of a giant headhunting effort where they're literally trying to just create lists of thousands of MAGA loyalists to take over these positions. And like, you might remember when like George W. Bush invaded Iraq and then sent a bunch of 20-year-old quasi-libertarians over there to run the place. You remember Remember that episode? They were really bad at it, because they were chosen for their ideological loyalty, and none of them had any experience, or none of them knew what the hell they were doing. Just imagine that, but running the U.S. federal bureaucracy, it's going to be a bunch of 22-year-old Liberty College graduates in charge of very sophisticated, complicated, bureaucratic machine, and they're just gonna, the whole thing is gonna become unreliable. And I think people just take so much of that for granted, they underestimate the scale of what could vanish out from beneath them.
Absolutely, and a functioning and professional state is, as you say, really a major achievement. It's not. It takes a long time. Francis Fukuyama has done great work on the absolute centrality of that to having political order itself. It's a key pillar of having a political order that's stable.
Yeah, and I think another thing too is you can never pass enough rules, explicit rules and laws governing these institutions to perfectly determine their behavior. You need culture. You need a culture that passes itself down. You need a culture that says we're independent, we're devoted to the truth, we don't care if it's R or D above us. That is a culture, a feeling, the kind of thing that gets passed down via norms, via conversations. It's intangible, but that's the stuff that's most difficult to build, is that enduring culture. And we've managed it in most of the federal bureaucracy. And I just think it's really easy to destroy that and really difficult to rebuild it after it's destroyed.
And David, let's not forget that civil servants are why we learned about some of Trump's very worst corruption during his first term, especially the Ukraine scandal. I want to return to something you brought up earlier, these lists. There's something that Media Matters caught, which is really interesting. I just pulled it up here on the screen. They have noticed that there's a pattern in right-wing media of a kind of rehabilitation of Joe McCarthy going on.
Yeah, it's been going on for a while.
Right, and in which people like Steve Bannon and Charlie Kirk, MAGA personalities like that are essentially saying McCarthy was right, and in some cases kind of saying what we're seeing now shows that McCarthy was right. And so emptying out the civil service, right? This is what I think we could kind of see happen. We've already seen House Republicans trying to hold university heads to the Hill and so forth. The House Republicans are really they're really not very good at that kind of stuff, right? I mean, they're all kind of fighting for Fox News scraps, right? They're all fighting for their moment on Fox News, and it always becomes a shit show as a result of that. But I think they're going to get better at it, and I think this kind of return to that type of McCarthyite rooting out of enemies within is going to really become key to emptying out the civil service.
That is the result of the first term. They're like, the federal bureaucracy is peopled with our enemies, and we have to worm them out. I mean, if you think about it, looking back on the first Trump term, that's one of the narratives in this election that drives me mad. Is people you wrote about a bunch of these business guys the other day who were like, well, Trump's first term wasn't so bad. He tried to do some bad things, but he's too incompetent and he failed, and he'll probably just bumble again for another 4 years. There are a bunch of stories like the story of Brad Raffensperger, is everybody holds it up as the iconic example. There are a bunch of examples where, but for sometimes a single person in the bureaucracy, Trump would have done much, much, much worse. There are lots of examples where normal people in his bureaucracy stopped or impeded or exposed him, or he would have done much worse. And that is precisely what they're eradicating. There will be no more of those people in the bureaucracy. And so again, even a lot of the stuff that we know about what Trump did, we only know, as you say, because of whistleblowers, because of people, or because of the people he appointed to high positions coming out later and saying, you know what, having talked to Trump, he's a friggin' maniac, and we can't let that guy get near the Oval Office. There's just going to be none of that. So again, we take for granted on many, many levels just the basic sense that we know what's going on, right? Just the fact that we know what's happening. And so if there's nobody in the bureaucracy blowing those whistles, nobody raising any fuss, imagine all the stuff that's just going to go on completely out of sight and out of mind. Like, what resources are people going to have to uncover those truths? We're just not going to know half the stuff he's doing.
Well, I want to bring up another thing that Bannon said recently, because it's really ominous and it sort of reinforces the points you're making here. He essentially said, you're damn right that we don't want anyone in MAGA who rejects the idea that the election was stolen in 2020 from Trump, right?
Yeah, that's the marker. You have to be, that's sort of like, yes, I'm willing to adopt a collective hallucination on behalf of Trump, right? I mean, that's sort of like, if you'll do it on that, you'll do it on anything.
You will be purged unless you hew 100% to Trump's reality.
Yeah, and also just alongside that, that's the informational side of things. And then if you read Project 2025 about the Department of Justice, I mean, it is harrowing. Again, this is not like, you can't emphasize it enough. This is not paranoid lefty speculation. These people wrote it down. You can go to the website and read Project 2025 on the Department of Justice, and it basically says, yes, the Department of Justice belongs to the president and is for him to advance his interests and punish his enemies. And the reason the first term didn't work is that people were squeamish about that. And when he comes back in, we're going to people the Department of Justice with people who understand their mission as eliminating Trump's enemies. And who's going to tell us what they're doing? How are we going to know what they're doing?
All these attacks on CNN, they're attacks on the very idea of neutral rules and facts being applied to Trump and so forth. But it sort of struck me as something more than the usual corrupt right-wing ref gaming that we've all seen for decades now. It was almost a celebration of the power to declare what reality is, right? And I think that's a key component of Trumpism and MAGA that is often lost on a lot of people, and it sort of dovetails with what you're talking about here. What they are declaring is the power to say what reality is. The lie is the point, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can see this evolution in a lot of different areas, sort of when they don't have as much power, when they're sort of subject to CNN, say, they complain about fairness, right? They're like, we just want this to be applied to everyone equally, and you're applying it to us unfairly, like pretending as though they also care about objective reality and they just want it fairly applied. But the more power they get, the less they have to put on that mask, the less they have to pretend, and the more the sort of truth comes out, which is like, you can't restrain us. Like, fact checking us is in their minds a power move, right? Everything in their minds is a power move. And they're like, we have more power than you. We're the bigger dog on the block, so we can say what we want, and you can't say jack about it. Like the idea that, we share the same standards is just sort of fading away as they gain more power, and there's less restraint, and there's less need for the pretense. And that, I think, again, will fall away entirely if Trump wins. There's going to be no pretense anymore that, like, the facts favor Republicans. It's just going to be like, we're the big dogs on the block now, so we get to say what is and isn't true. Like, that's a prerogative of power. That's kind of how they see it. I don't think they see anything other than power involved.
Well, there's your connecting thread from the CNN stuff to Project 25 right there. Folks, let me tell you that David Roberts is actually a climate writer by day. That's his day job. His Substack is called Volts. You should check it out. But he takes all these useful excursions into critiquing our discourse, and we learn a lot from those. David, thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Awesome. Always a pleasure.
You've been listening to The Daily Blast with me, your host, Greg Sargent. The Daily Blast is a New Republic podcast and is produced by Riley Fessler and the DSR Network.